Hi, my name is David Wetton, and welcome to the Conscious Leadership Now podcast. The intent of this podcast is to encourage you as a leader to embrace conscious leadership by giving you access to some of the world's leaders in the field of conscious leadership, both in practice and in thought. My heartfelt wish is that you leave this podcast feeling inspired with ideas to take away and implement in your business or organization to make a real difference in our world. So today, my guest is Amaranatho. Hi, Ama.
Hi, hello. Great to see you, David.
Wonderful to see you too. Now, Ama started his working life as a technical support manager, and this took him on a transformational journey from getting a degree in AI to world explorer and spending 15 years as a Buddhist monk. He's now a mindful-based executive and agile mindset coach, Scrum Master, where he supports executives, leaders and teams to stay calm and connected in complex situations. He developed the playful monk approach to awaken people and their organizations to their true potential, and is currently accredited to be a coaching supervisor. Now, when you land on his website, playfulmonk.net, it says, stay calm and connected in complex situations and awaken to your true potential. And his work has brought him in contact with corporate organizations, educational establishments, families, and young people. And what he shares is based on cutting-edge science, ancient wisdom, and creative multimedia. He's interested in the interpersonal aspects of mindfulness and how we can use our daily interaction with people to develop emotional resilience, kindness, and peace. His approach of explore, play, and love develops presence, which is the ability to stay fully focused on what's going on in the present moment and not be restricted by past habits. Ama, it's clear that you have a depth for a deep dive and grounded presence for conscious leadership. And I can't wait to see where we go in this conversation. And it's an absolute delight to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. It's great, really great to be here. See the image of London behind you.
Yes.
You know, the Big Wheel and Big Ben, these powerful symbols.
Yes. Well, I'm hoping today actually we take a trip on that wheel and we go up high and see where we go. And perhaps we hit the depths of the Thames as well. We'll see. Take 5, your take on 5 conscious leadership questions. So, Ama, the first question is, what does conscious leadership mean to you?
It's very interesting playing that music and staying in the present moment now and speaking from that place about conscious leadership. Because when I reflect on that music and I hear that music being played, I think, well, where's the leader in that? There isn't one. They're all leaders. They're all conscious. They're all attuning to one another. And the music appears out of that. And for me, that's really what being a conscious leader is all about. It's awakening to your full potential, you know. And I think in the position that we are in the world right now, leadership is in for a big change. You know, we have these big symbols like the symbols behind you, Big Ben and all of that, but they're on their way out. They're heroic things from the past. And the idea of the heroic leader is old school. The one of the band, the one of us awakening to who we are, our full human potential, what the possibilities we are to be in this present moment, as it is, in its fullness, in its richness, that, like you said, the ups and the downs. This is the gift. And that's for me what conscious leadership is all about. It's about really finding out who you are and how you can relate to one another. You know, and leadership is about serving one another. It's about service, not about being how big we are or how much we do, but actually what can we do in helping other people come up to the same level as we are.
Thank you, Emma. So much in that, so much. And before I ask you, I've got a couple of questions. I got one as a comment, actually. Thank you for bringing the music in, because what came to my mind was, not that I play jazz, but I do love jazz. And those that are involved in it actually say that when they're playing the jazz together, as you said, they're in the present moment and they're jamming and it's emerging.
That's right.
So as you said, who's the leader? They don't know, because sometimes someone plays something and the other one comes in and plays around it, and then they might take the lead and the other one does. And it's, but the interesting thing, isn't it, actually, to get to that level of playing, they've had to put in hours and hours of practice. So it's not something they've had to be very conscious in actually developing a practice to get there.
Exactly. On both accounts. Yeah, the leader can also duck and dive. It can take full space, but can also pull back and allow others in. You know, that's the emergent aspect of it. And then actually you're committed to developing yourself. And that's ongoing. That one is a lifelong learning. It's not that somehow you attain something, you reach something and you say, aha, I am the leader. You know, I am in a position to be able to do it. Life isn't like that. Certainly hasn't been in my own personal experience. I've always been learning. I'm always learning. You know, the idea, you know, and also the idea of what consciousness is. What actually is that? You know, are we talking about the small one, the small c one, which is within our minds? You know, that are we talking about the one of full, you know, where everything is conscious, in my understanding, in my experience? You know,
isn't that wonderful, actually, that perhaps when you wake up, so if you're calling it that bigger C, then maybe there is an understanding of actually who is the leader here. Actually, we're all leaders, or actually we're in a place where that label is no longer required because we're responding to what's arising in the moment.
Right. And we might say, excuse me, would you mind being the leader right now? Because actually you have the capabilities to deal with this situation. Yeah. And then in another one, you might say, well, actually, I'd like to step back from that now. And I think you know, a high performance team is actually working like that. You know, what have they done? They've actually developed themselves enough to trust and enable, you know. And then in terms of a bigger organization, yeah, how can you keep passing that type of message further down? As a leader, how do you create an environment of which you can have a lot of jazz players, really? I mean, that you know, how can you say this is allowed, you know? And I don't need it. I don't need that label myself, right? I'm in service of you. Like I've never really used conscious leadership, because all I did was I worked out from the ground upwards. When I was in the monastery, I was running these family camps, and I just worked out what works. And I had an intuition that if I didn't take charge, it would probably be a much nicer place, right? I was in the role of leadership. I was facilitating with another nun, you know, and the idea was that if I didn't pick up such a big chunk and actually let things unfold, it would be a lot easier, emergent. And also, you know, I allowed it to be self-organizing, right? Which I didn't know at the time, actually, like it's agile and next stage, all of this type of stuff. Because I couldn't do it. You know, if you've got 100 people, you just can't do that. You can't be in the cooking committee and the game committee. You just have to say to somebody, you know, who wants to do it, would you like to do that? You know, what do you need from me? You know, and when I worked with the young people, I did the same thing. They'd say to me, you know, I'd say to them, what do you want to do? And they say, I want to do a video. So I say, here's the video camera. Yeah. Fred over here's got the video camera. Give it to the young people. Get on with it. Right. Tell me what you need. We need a room. You haven't produced it by Friday. It was Wednesday. Well, that's not my problem. What support do you need?
Yeah.
It was still produced.
It was. And actually bringing an interesting point, because I'm just looking here on my shelf.
Yes.
To mention something else. I have the book, you may come across it. It's a book by Frederick Laloux called Reinventing Organizations.
Indeed.
And I was also out in California, San Francisco, where I met people from Zappos, the shoemakers.
Yes.
Sellers, I should say. And they were working with holacracy, which you've probably heard of, which again is this fluid where people can step in and take charge.
Yes.
But the point that I just want to raise, because I think you embody this, which leads into the next question, but it was that they'd introduced this holacracy, which is a way of reorganizing so people can lead in different ways. However, what they were struggling with, and I honored them, is they said, actually, we need to develop our emotional intelligence and possibly even spiritual intelligence to be able to take full advantage of holacracy. Exactly.
And you could, I don't see how you can do it any other way, embodying these types of principles, right? I just don't see it. And I've tried to look at it lots of different ways. But without some sort of emotional, relational intelligence, how can you do it? Because you're coming from a mindset which says silos, which says about me. It doesn't say about crossing, you know, and a lot of these next stage transitions always have this difficulty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, so how do you support people with their emotional intelligence? How do you get them to be able to connect and trust? Deep trust. This requires deep trust. It's not just like, this is okay and you can do that. It's actually, one person connecting to another and actually sharing what they feel and how they, how they understand themselves and how another person can support them. And we haven't, as a society, valued that. We've valued other things in our education system. SEL, social emotional learning, is only coming along in the young people's generation this time. So how can we bring that into business? EQ, SQ, spiritual quotient, emotional quotient. The main thing is to understand yourself.
Absolutely, yes. And that's quite often, people coming on the podcast you've spoken beautifully about presence, will then talk about then awareness of self, awareness of others,
yes,
relationship, because you said it's relational.
Yes.
So as I move into this next question, I'm going to put something around this, because you bring something to the table here, which I know the listeners will really benefit from listening about too. And that is, my next question is about, the second question is, how do you express conscious leadership through your work? But where I want to couch this one, or actually touch on this, is two elements. One, you've already spoken about the let's call it charismatic or hero leadership is moving away or it's dying. But I want to bring in two elements, and that is from your Buddhist monk background. How do you deal with this aspect of the ego at times getting in the way in respect of leadership and embodying leadership? And the second one, which I think links in with this charismatic leadership, is how do you manage, I think you said to me before we came on, that as a monk, people can look up to you, can worship you. And of course, as we know, in an organizational setting, the leader can often be put on a pedestal and worshipped.
Yes.
If you could weave those two aspects into your answer around that, I think thank you. I really would love to hear that.
Great. I'd like to answer that. One of the things, it's been actually really surprising that because of the wearing the robes and being the monk, actually I can relate to that position really clearly. I was actually surprised myself when I started working with leaders and CEOs. Oh, actually I do know about that, And so the idea of wearing the robe is actually to wear down the ego. Right? Because you get projected on, you get transference. And your job is not to associate with that transference. Your job is to stay empty. Right? So you start to learn that. So it's an interesting, my hands already go like this because that's how you put on the robe. So you do this movement and you flick the robe on your shoulder. So when I train myself to do that, as I flick my robe on the shoulder, there was a sense of centeredness. Of which said, it's not me. They're not bowing to me. They're not touching my feet. They're not giving food to me. They're giving to the robe.
Yeah.
Right? So where is Amaranatho in all of that? He's not there. Right? And then of course then the ego comes up and says, well, what about me? God, look at you. You've done such a good job. You've got the food for today, or you did the great talk, or you ran that retreat, or whatever it is. Or that wasn't very good. You didn't get much food today, when you go out begging on the street. So the whole training is actually to understand the ego. So ego is incredibly important, right? And I think, in terms of, I like to say, really, I do egoless leadership, right? And then when we say egoless leadership, we think we've got to have a prefrontal lobotomy. We've got to take out half our brain, cut it off, throw it away, and then somehow we're going to be perfect. But that's not really what egoless leadership is for me. What I understand and what I learned running again the family camps was that you need your ego for planning, right? And the ego loves it. It's very good at it. My one's very good at it. It's very good at planning. It can do ABC. It can come up with all the structures, right? And that's what I did. So there was a lot of planning that went into running the family camp. But on the first day of when that camp happened, let it all go. No investment in it whatsoever. If it happened, it happened. If it didn't happen, then just move it around. it rains on Thursday, we can't go on the walk. Yeah, yeah. So it's the same thing when you're wearing the suit, you know, or you're wearing your jeans and your jumper in, you know, in the office, and people say, well, you're the CEO, you've got to make the decision. You know, how can you transfer that back? How can you not take, because it's all about power.
Yes.
What we're talking about is how do you relate to power? And the monastic life for me was actually really good. It was also had a negative aspect to it as well, which was it conditioned me into a sort of powerful mode, which actually I've also had to decondition myself out of, regardless of the egoless aspect, because it's a tradition and it has a culture around it, and there's certain values that go with it, of which I didn't need even as a monk, but they come for free. And so being able to get perspective on all of that allows you then, of course, you get culture. That's how you change culture, by working with that. But this aspect of knowing yourself well enough, knowing and understanding your ego, is really important. And I learned another chunk which I learned how to deal with this is working with young people, which I still have a passion for as well, is that young people will just tell you they like it or they don't like it, right? And they will walk in or walk out, right? So whose problem is that? Yours or theirs? Actually, it's yours. You're the one that did the program. Yeah, I'm the one that did the program. Yeah. So I'm the one that can be flexible with it, right? Yeah. So you change things, you adapt, you learn, right? So what happens? Your ego gets dented, doesn't it? You know, yes. I put all this effort into this program and they don't like it and blah, 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 you know, and it'll go on and on and on. But does that serve the situation? Does it help me? Does it help them? No, it doesn't. Right? So this willingness to let go, to ease the conditioning, yeah, understand your conditioning, how you've been formed as a person, and then maybe even as a leader, you know, that you've slotted in. A lot of leadership problems happen when actually a person moves into leadership position and doesn't understand any of the dynamics that go with being a leader, right? That's like putting on the robe, yeah. Right? As soon as you put on the robe, a whole load of things come with it, which you weren't expecting. Yeah. And being able to understand that, yeah, frees you from it.
And I really love, I hadn't thought of this before, so thank you. I love that you're on the show. When you spoke about putting on your robe and the ego aspect, do you know what came to me? The aspect of the exec, male or female, who suddenly, let's say, becomes the CEO or something.
Yes.
Now, I just thought actually their robe then, it's a bit broader than perhaps a garment. It might well be they dress up. But my sense was, of course, with the CEO does come, you know, the really well-paid salary, perhaps the setup on the pension, the beautiful house, maybe private education for the children, the car, the office, and the power aspect of actually when I call a meeting, people come.
Yes.
So there's a whole robe that they put on, which probably once they become aware of, they can start almost then freeing themselves of that.
Yes.
Because you spoke, I think, about power, and I think that's really important. That for me, it's very easy in that role, like you put the robe on, they put on the trappings to slip into a kind of power over mode.
That's it.
As opposed to actually, as you say, taking a breath and actually thinking, actually, no, this is actually, if I have some sort of spiritual connection, it's a power through, because it's not about me. What's being called in this organization to make a difference in the world,
right.
And then a power with. So actually, as you said, whoever comes through, I'm drawn with, I'm working alongside them. And actually, as you said, I love the children's example, because when people come in, I do believe that although, and we spoke earlier before we came on air, that actually we all have our inner children. So when people come into a meeting, I think if they don't like it, as you said, unlike the children, they don't get up and walk out. But do you know what? I actually believe that a part of them does get up and walk out.
Indeed.
And so I think that if you're attuned as an exec, you will sense that. And it's that element that you just spoke beautifully about from an ego perspective, of being able to let go of what your agenda might be.
Yes.
And that's perhaps name it in the room and say, I sense actually there's not quite an agreement, or what's the concern? Because I really want to hear what you're saying.
Exactly. And it's interesting, as you were speaking now, I was thinking about the number of executives where I've done it with walk and talk, actually. We've done it through walking and talking. Yeah, and then we're actually we're connected. We're sideways on, you see. So we're actually walking together. Yeah, and then that's a physical, like, representation of what you can do with other people. You don't. It doesn't have to be confrontational.
Oh,
You can be
wonderful.
walking with.
And what I want to ask before we move on to the next question, actually, because again, I think this is wonderful. Just shows, I think, the power of your work. I think when I read out on the introduction, it says, obviously, if you're walking and talking, you help them, I guess, to stay focused on what's going on in the present moment. And of course, Thich Nhat Hanh, who I love, actually says, walk as if you're kissing Mother Earth with your feet. So you're really fully present in that moment. But what I wanted to ask in this embodied sense, you then say, be in the present moment and not be restricted by past habits.
Yes.
How do you help them see those habits and then transform them?
Well, actually, the relationship itself will do that. That's what I trust. So I don't have a load of fancy processes, right? I don't have the 10 steps to blah, 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 all that, because the world isn't like that. And that's what we've seen today, you see, from the pandemic. We've seen it isn't so easy to do the step-by-step process. It's actually complex, right? So in a complex, in a complex adaptive system, it's just an analogy. It's not that we are totally like that, but it's a good analogy. In a complex adaptive system, you have to see the whole. So the more that you can see the whole, the more that you can sense it, the easier it is to respond. And that's that way of actually bringing it to the surface. Can you stay with the whole system, right? Can you stay with the whole of the person? Not just the bits that you like, or the bits that you don't like, or the bits that you want to fix, but actually everything. And in that, I trust that it will arise. And I know, actually, it's not just I trust, I know. I've done it enough times now, on all sorts of different levels, with all sorts of different people, in all sorts of different situations, companies, that it works. It has to be a willingness, not just me. It's that both of us are willing to turn up like that. And in that turning up, that arising will happen, the emergence will happen. That's what trust is. Trusting when you look into a complex system, things will emerge. They become attractors or detractors. You can focus or not focus on things. You can, allow things to go away, to move down, not go away, move down, and then bring things to the surface, right? So sometimes this is seen like a strength-based or value-based. So for me, these things just emerge.
I get you, and I hear you say you don't have your 10 ways to success or something.
Yes.
But one final one on this, because I think for leaders and for coaches listening, how do you then, because I guess when people connect with you and I sense your presence, how do you manage that? Because I'm sure it's there. If I've got this right or not, I'm going to call it, I may not be technically right, but I'll explain. I call this transference. So what I mean is you're walking, talking, say, or wherever you're working with.
Yes.
And perhaps they then sense a depth of this man.
Yes.
Actually, you've got all the answers for me. Show me what I need to do. How do you manage that transference?
You see, that goes back to the robes, because you see, I've had so much of that done, that I'm very sensitive to that. And my job is to make sure that doesn't happen. Right? That I don't get puffed up. And that I don't put myself back into the traditional leadership role, or the guru role. I can be a mentor, and that's different. So I might say to myself, right now I'm entering mentoring mode, and I'm going to give from my experience, this is what happened with me, and frame it in that way. And then be very clear that I move back into a coaching, non-directive role, and to actually allow and empower and push back that power and that authority. And I don't allow authority to stay with me. And I'm actually very clear with it, because there's certain clients that I work with, which I've worked with for a long time, where I feel we've reached an equal basis, right? And at that point, I say, we can finish our coaching if you want. It's entirely up to you, as far as I can see. If you want to have a check-in now and again, that's fine. If you want to continue from now onwards, we are very much on the same level. This is not supervision, this is coaching, that we're on this level, and we're going to work as a sparring partner or a generative dialogue or something like that. And then we recontract from that place, right? And that takes us to a very different level, And then in my supervision work, that's much more about helping people within the ethical and the integrity framework, you know,
Got you.
and actually holding somebody accountable outside of their system.
Yes, and I resonate with that, because my role as a coach, I will actually state, not on this perspective, that my role is not to, as I call it, bestow wisdom from up on high.
Yes.
But my role is to empower you to release that internal wisdom that's
Yes.
always been with you.
Yes, that's right.
So it's actually finding their own answers on this, and there's this element for me of presence, holding the space for that to emerge for them. Yes, and of course there may be some things I help, like you said, to actually get in touch with some of their habits or things, or to enable that, but I'm quite clear that it's not me directing as you've got to do this. It's actually let's actually get in touch with your own innate wisdom.
Right. And the more that one touches consciousness, and the easier that is.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. Gosh, wow. So resources, and I know you've had, I'm curious to see how you'll say this, whether you'll bring in an abbot, a Buddhist abbot or whatever, but my next question is, it's a two-part one. It says resources. Yeah. Who for you is an exemplar of embodied conscious leadership, and why?
I don't have one.
Not even the Buddha?
No. I don't know whether he existed or not. What I know is I took his teachings and I applied them and they worked. Mm-hmm. And that I can trust. And that I know, I clearly know. Mm. I'm transferring authority back to the person that's listening.
Mm. So how to, because I've always thought of this, you know, I myself have traveled across the, Buddhist traditions. What's your response? And it's almost a leadership. You take this where you want to take it.
Yeah.
But what's the response? You know, so when you go in and actually there's bowing to the, the abbot or the monk, and there's bowing to the Buddha. What's your relationship to that? How does that sit with you?
See, that's a fantastic thing to understand and appreciate and learn how to use. Mm-hmm. So when I arrived at the monastery, there was a lot of hand greeting like this. Yeah. Yeah. And I used to do this to the abbot. Yes. And the abbot would sort of go back like this to me and make fun of me. Mm-hmm. Right. And then when he was leaving to go away, everybody used to sort of do this and kneel down and squat down. And I couldn't do that. I just waved. Yeah. Right. And exploring that with him, what I saw was it was around actually knowing myself better. Yeah. Yes. Actually, I was just doing this out of blind ritual. Yes. Right. Because that's what the form said. Yeah. Yeah. So the more that I actually understood, what am I actually doing? How does this actually work? Actually, this is a very important gesture. When you really understand this movement, so
putting your hands together for those that are listening, your palms together.
Yeah, your palms together. Thank you. Yeah, your palms together. Yeah, it does something to the body. When you're more embodied, you can actually feel what that does.
It's like a mudra, is that right? Or?
Yes, it's a mudra. Yeah. 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 It's a mudra. And you can actually feel what that does. So it becomes from a new age, like woo-woo thing, to actually something that you know what does. And it's the same with bowing, right? So one of the things I did on my young person's retreat, in order to explore bowing with the young people, was I asked them to bow backwards to the Buddha. That means I meant to put their bum towards the Buddha, right? And they all said, that's disrespectful. You can't
Absolutely, that's totally disrespectful.
Totally disrespectful. You can't do that. So, but what are you actually doing? Yeah, the whole idea of bowing, what does it actually do to you? It actually puts you back in the fetal position. Yeah. Right? It puts your head below your heart. It's the way that you came into the world. In an embryo, you start with a heart at the top and the head at the bottom, if you look at it, right? And then we unfold. Mm-hmm. But our heart was at the top first, right? So if you can bow empty with an empty mind, it doesn't matter where you bow, because you see the Buddha everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're not bowing to a person, you're bowing to the qualities. Yes. In that way, you're bowing to yourself.
And quite often I've heard the mudra be, particularly in Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, that the a kind of rose for you, the Buddha in me sees the Buddha in you. So, yes. And it's very similar actually then to the Christian thing, which is actually love your neighbour as you love yourself. Because what people forget in Christianity is you love yourself first, then you're able to love your neighbour.
Right.
We perhaps know traditions that actually there's no difference between myself and my neighbour. It's a process, but it then might take us to what you're just speaking about, turning back to the Buddha. Someone once said to me, or actually it almost was Zen Koan, they said, David, either everything is sacred or nothing is.
Right.
So that came to my mind now, whether you're bowing or got your backside to the Buddha, it's like, I'm still actually honoring, you said, the teachings or what's there, or honoring me, and I'm honoring my presence, and I'm honoring your presence.
Right.
And also take that further, I'm honoring the presence of everything that I'm coming into contact with here.
Exactly. And you can apply that in the office.
Yeah.
And apply that as a CEO, as a leader, and as an executive. You know,
God.
what you doing with your laptop? You bowing to your laptop? How are you bowing to your laptop? You know, people say a big thing about Zoom. I don't know. For me, I've been working remote for years, so I don't know what the problem is with it. But I think we're just humans, and this is, you know, we're doing it through that. Yes, it's nice to do walk and talk. I was lucky enough yesterday to do a physical walk and talk with social distancing, you know, and that was great. But still, you can honor one another. There's no way that we're not honoring one another, as far as I can see right now.
Absolutely, and I can.
So there you go. You know, it's yeah.
And I can be grateful for the technology, you know, coming back to your background. So it's, yes. I think it's part of that. Gosh, it's a good conversation. So the next part of this on the resources one is, what resources have you found helpful in your journey? At
this point in time, yeah, if I look back, I have to do it like retrospectively.
Yes.
So if I look back, the greatest resource, and it may sound arrogant to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway, is myself. Because who else have you got, right? I've had some fantastic teachers. I've had a ton of psychotherapy. I've had a fantastic supervisor. I've had people that have offered me all sorts of techniques and healings, and all tremendous amount of people, right? I've never done it alone, right? In the end, being able to understand yourself, really having awareness, and through self-awareness to awareness itself, yeah, to your true potential, really who you are, that is the greatest resource. And once you recognize that and find that, that is freedom, peace, and it's the end of the journey and the starting of life.
Wow. and there's just something just flashed in there. I want to take a breath as well, because I really love that. And there was something actually that actually says, you know what came to me then, that actually conscious leadership is a journey back to self.
Thank you for saying that.
Because actually when you're back to self,
yes,
then just, you said, I think then it's not an ego thing, but actually then you're truly ready.
Yes.
Serve.
That's right.
As you said, from this empty place.
Yes.
Because
you can really serve.
You can serve, and as you beautifully said earlier, doesn't mean we work with the ego, because you said ego's great for planning.
It is.
But then you're not just serving. I think you're actually then aware of actually tapping into those talents, the abilities of those people you've got around you.
Yes.
And being grateful for them.
Thank you. And the planet.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Everything it becomes sustainable. It becomes generative. Gosh. And this is not rocket science. This is not difficult stuff to do. It takes commitment. It takes time, and it does take some form of patience as well.
I just, you were talking there, the vision or the stuff that came into my head, and I don't know what the leaders are feeling like who are watching and listening to this podcast, but I had a sense, and just you were talking about conscious leadership being a journey back to self, and it does involve some practices, which will be the next question. But what I was thinking of actually is then this being this conscious intent that if you're a leader, and I know it's COVID and perhaps a lot of people at the moment most are working from home, but assuming we are going back to some sort of working together again in one location, or at least going in for some time, giving some thought about that location, particularly around nature. How can you actually construct that location or make the most of that, so that actually it supports the employees that are working there, so they can access. I'm a big one for being able to access nature.
Yes.
But just a sense of looking at the surroundings. How can the surroundings actually help you go on this conscious leadership journey back to yourself, if that makes sense? Because sometimes, and here I am in London, you can come up against what I call the hard concrete.
Yes.
And you almost come up against a block.
Yes.
And sometimes it's saying, actually, even within this, what can we put in? How can we have things in place that help us connect with our humanity?
Thank you. And you know what's interesting? There was a research done out here. I live in the Netherlands at the moment, And there's a research done out here in hospitals where they put grass on the top of a roof of the hospital, and they looked out the patients looked out the window, and those patients recovered quicker than patients that didn't have grass on their roof. So it's quite amazing what you can do when you have that ability to connect to nature, you know, or make it more humane, really. That's what's important.
I agree. So time for just a kind of short break. And the short break is just me saying to the listeners, actually, if you're enjoying this podcast and my approach to conscious leadership, then please know that I help aspiring conscious leaders develop purpose-led, high-performing leadership teams through my one-to-one coaching and tailored leadership programs. So if you get a sense that I can help you, then please look me up. That's David Wetton on LinkedIn, and let's jump onto a conversation together. So I said the next question is around drawing on the inner life resources. And it starts with saying actually research, and this is evidence-based research, as Professor Jody Fry, Texas A&M University. And he actually calls it spiritual leadership. But he says research suggests that an inner life is the source of spiritual leadership or conscious leadership, where inner life is a form of spiritual or contemplative or reflective practice, including, as we just said, could be walking nature, meditation, whatever that might be. So I know you've probably got a ton of these, but what practices have you found helpful and why in your journey?
So I would say mindfulness, in the secular way that we use it has been really helpful. And meditation that I learned as a monk has been really amazing. And I would say the ability to self-reflect, metacognition, it's called in science, has been the most powerful thing that I've learned, because I've actually learned to be able to observe and witness my own mind. And that has been what I brought with me, and that's what's really saved me. And then through that, actually understanding awareness itself. That's what brought me to that's what brought me to the understanding and the recognition of what awareness is. Not as a mental concept, but as a knowing.
Wonderful, thank you. And I want to ask you a question, because it's great to have you here. I can ask you this question. From an evidence-based perspective, what I mean by that, I was at the Academy of Management that happens in the US, I think Canada as well, North America, where top world actually academics and practitioners get together. Things from an academic research perspective. And I believe one of the papers, has been a number written on these, and what they're looking at, they've called this, and you'll be aware of this, they've called it MAC mindfulness. So actually they were looking into what's the difference between someone just grasping mindfulness and delivering it in a secular perspective and saying this is the answer, as between those that are actually doing their mindfulness and their meditation through some form of Buddhist tradition. So what's your take on that? You know, mindfulness being, I'll take what's there and I'll do a bit of it in a secular way, versus something rooted in a tradition. Do you see benefits in both? What's your take on mindfulness?
That's actually a very complicated question in a way. So I'll try and break it down. So mindfulness in a way is leaving out culture, right? It's leaving out the interpersonal thing. And most people assume that mindfulness is a personal thing, but it's actually an interpersonal activity, right? So it was always done within a framework of culture and society and ethics. So, for example, in my contracts, when I work with companies around mindfulness, it says I won't adapt employees to organizational stress. So I won't come into a company, and work just so that they can be adapted to be better robots. Right. If there's a way of us working where we can get feedback between me and HR or whoever's, then that's different. But I won't come in and do that, because that's the mindfulness approach. Right. And then in terms of having a wider perspective, you know, in terms of like my Buddhist background, well, there was ethics. We did follow an ethical framework. Did it totally work? Actually, it didn't even work quite well in the monastery either. In the end, you know, when I lived there, it also had its ethical problems. Right. So I'm not saying one is better than the other, actually, or you can benefit from one or the other. I'm saying work out what it is for yourself, where we come back to humanity. And this idea of being kind to one another, is the ability to reflect, to have compassion, to have love for one another. And sometimes external guidelines. Yeah, the Buddhist ethics are guidelines. They're not imposed. They are a practice to help you to develop mindfulness. They are not a moral stance, right? They're there to actually help you to develop concentration, and concentration helps you to develop wisdom. That's the classical framework. And in the monastery I lived in, actually, although we agreed to the ethical framework, we worked backwards from wisdom, because lots of, particularly Western educated people get wisdom first. They get insight, yeah, and then they use that to say, actually, I want to change my life. So if you look at, like, say, for the vegan movement right now, a lot of people have started to think, actually, I don't want to eat this way. I don't want to hurt animals. I'm going to change to live this way. Yeah. I'm going to see what I need to do in order to be able to live that way and how it works with my body. Some people can do it and some people can't. And that's fair enough. Right. But it's that way around. So any approach which just says, well, here's a little thing and you can just, if you just apply this, you'll get this result. That to me is the step approach, and that won't be able to help you sort out and deal with a complex situation. Because in a complex situation, it's much more messy. Yeah,
it is. Relational. And you've brought up a really important point there. Actually, one that I came across this week, and I joined something called the Oxford Review, which is actually, it's come out of someone who's at Oxford University. But from a management perspective, so leadership perspective, they review the thousands of papers that come out and they put together briefings which summarize it in normal everyday speak, not the academic speak. And I just think it's a fabulous service. So I'm part of that. But one of the papers that came out, it said something that actually coaches don't ask very often, is they take the business culture as read.
Yes.
As you said, quite often when they go in and coach, they look to adapt the individual to the culture, and never ask the question, actually, does the culture itself need to transform?
Right. So and this is what I find, I'm absolutely shocked by it, to be honest. It's taken me a long time to understand, there's 5 years that I've been transitioning. It's taken me a long time to understand that, because I didn't get it. And it's only over these last few years that I actually really get that, that you have to look at culture. I assumed that that's what was happening. That was the problem. I assumed that people were investigating culture and that's what they were, but they weren't, because that's been such a natural way for me. That's how I've seen life. That's how I've done. I work with the family camp and the people that I work with. And then to see this in operation, that you wouldn't consider looking at the operating environment, totally bizarre. I mean, like, why? What? A lot of the time, I've just been stunned. Yesterday I was on a call and I came away from it thinking, am I missing something here? It seems to me so obvious, but that's the connection. Like, that's what I'm saying. When you learn and you understand and recognize yourself about being connected, how would you not look at the environment?
Absolutely. And again, we spoke before, Anne, and I said I would bring it in.
Yes.
Is this aspect of being in this time of pandemic, which is related to that concept we spoke of liminal space, kind of not knowing and things emerging.
Yes, that's right.
But I think let's say from my perspective, let me own it.
Yes.
One opportunity that I see in conscious business, conscious leadership, is that because there's now a focus on purpose on business, there's a focus around values.
Yes.
For me, that's why I asked that question, how do you express conscious leadership through your work? How do you embody it?
Yes.
From my passionate perspective, if you're really serious about embodying your purpose, embodying your values, it leads you to the place where you have to consider the culture and the processes you have around that, because otherwise you are wasting your time, in my view.
Well, you're not going to get ROI. It's like, how can one person look after 10,000 people? Right? You can't do that. You can't split your attention up in that way. So you're never going to get, if you look after the environment, surely the people are going to feel empowered. They're want to contribute. They want to give their best. It must improve your business. I mean, it's not that difficult to think about.
Yeah. And then sometimes it comes back to that thing again. I like what's come out today. Conscious leadership is a journey back to self, or to yourself.
Yes.
And I think when you take that journey, perhaps then there's an insight that says actually a conscious leader develops leaders.
Yes.
A charismatic leader develops followers.
Thank you.
So I think if you get that, you go, because then actually that can help me, because it's saying, oh, am I actually here? Because it's back to that transference. Actually, they then become a follower. David, you have the answers. It's like, no, actually, by actually saying I'm paid to become a leader, it's saying you're here to bring your gifts. Yes. And the other scary conversation on this can be, when I've done work, people say, but David, if we go into this stuff, we're going to lose this employee because they'll find out they're not aligned with the organization, or they need to go elsewhere. And I just take a breath and say, I think that's absolutely fine, because if they're not aligned with what you're doing here, why would you really want them here?
Yes.
2 reasons. One, you actually want them to live their life as they're here. So if that's elsewhere, bless them and let them go. Yeah. Then in this space, we're talking about space today, in this emptiness, you can allow someone to approach this organization that really carries it in their heart.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
So,
and that's the liminal space about being able to trust that and navigate through that. And that's the skill in itself. Yeah.
Now, gosh, this is my last one for you. It seems this is a big question, isn't it? And there probably is an answer, but it says, finally, given unlimited time and resources, what single thing would you recommend aspiring conscious leaders to do?
Oh, only one thing: awareness. There's nothing else. Everything else is a side discourse to that.
And where is there a single place where would, if someone listening to this thinking, gosh, awareness, I love this conversation, where would you invite them to start?
With themselves right now. Don't wait. This is it. Can you do, like, the one thing that I really learned from the monastery was just to say yes to life. A big fat yes. That's all.
Would that be then from your experience with, if it would say yes, that actually then does, in my language, does like the path unfold for them, or where do you see that?
I don't know, because I'm not them.
but something appears for them, does it? Because
it's frustrating, isn't it? Isn't it frustrating? Like, that's the thing, is a matter of trust. And also why having somebody walk alongside you can be so helpful. But it is this, like, you get to know yourself. And you'll see how it unfolds for you. You know, like we talked about complex adaptive systems, emergence. How do things emerge? You know.
So one final one on this, because it brings it back to, again, your practice and your experience, and just come to me again. And this is a sense of, and I think it's come from my kind of Celtic Christian tradition.
Nice.
And they always kind of say, actually, that there's actually 3 elements, they said, to the journey. It's a spiritual journey, but I want to put it in the context of organizational journey, but I'll talk at it from spiritual, and we'll see if it lands where it lands. So from a spiritual perspective, say actually there's 3 elements. One is actually that you connect with and resonate with spiritual practices that will support you in opening up to your awareness and developing that in your presence. That's one. The second one is actually then it's very helpful to get a mentor. Can be alongside you in the journey. And it was St. Bridget in this tradition who said, a person without a soul friend, we call it soul friend, is like a body without a head. She felt it was really important to have a mentor. And then the third one was actually then to be connected to a spiritual community. And we know that Thich Nhat Hanh has said that the next Buddha will be a Sangha, will be a spiritual community. So when we take these 3 elements, is there anything that comes up for you in respect of an organizational perspective? You know,
well, that's what a lot of organizations are actually trying to do. You know, and that's why I see they're all heading it in a way to, they're trying to build communities fast now. Because they've been so disconnected. And then, you know, my conversation yesterday with somebody in a large firm was saying, you know, just they've started to get to know each other. They've had time. They've had to get to know each other. They're building community. And out of that community, mentors appear, because they always do. Those that can lead will lead. You can always work that out. You know, if you've done any type of rock, I've done a lot of rock climbing and taking people mountaineering. As soon as you get in a difficult situation, you'll find a leader. That one will come up. Not the bossy one, but the one that's just very calm, takes hold of the situation and goes forward. So, you know, these are sort of universal principles. Why do they appear in all sorts of different religions? Because they're the way that we're set up. We're set up from this on a physical basis, even. If we look at our biology is for connection. It is for support. One of the, we're probably running out of time, but just a short story. My first family camp that I ran, I ended up on my back and nearly in hospital on the first evening because I thought that I should do it alone. Right. And I learned a massive lesson on that one. That never, ever happened again. It took me quite a lot of psychotherapy to understand that I would not do it alone. I would do it with support. And that's always been the case until you feel that then you're supported by the world.
Yeah.
And then you can be alone because you're never alone.
Gosh, what a wonderful place to finish on there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you for the space.
And I do have, those listening will know, I have my Columbo, just one more thing question, because I love Columbo. So this is just one really opportunity for you to share your own resources and offerings, your website and whatever, which you feel will be helpful, and to help, actually, you've spoken about connection, to help people connect into you if they've really enjoyed this conversation and what you've had to say here. Great.
So I would say come and find me on LinkedIn, Amaranatho, or find me through my website, playfulmonk.net. And if you really are interested in taking a deep dive, a co-exploration, to awaken to your true potential, I'd be more than happy to chat with you.
And that just sounds wonderful to me, and I can sense there'll be a few leaders listening to this that actually will. I would encourage you actually to be up for that journey, because it does sound wonderful to me. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Riyama, just thank you so much for being on the podcast and for being present in the world of conscious leadership in the way that you do. I've really have enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot, and thank you for your time here today.
Oh, thank you, David. Really, it's been a pleasure, a real pleasure. Thank you. Have a good day.
Will do. And I want to thank all the listeners to this podcast. And if you're willing, please do share a link to this podcast with those you think would truly benefit from it. Because I truly believe that now is the time for conscious leadership. And with all the inspiring, heartfelt work you as listeners are doing, I have no doubt that conscious leadership will become a thriving reality, making a difference for the greater good of all. So until next time, I'll leave you with a blessing from John O'Donoghue. May the light of your soul bless the work you do with the secret love and warmth of your heart. And so it is.
So it is.